Check, check, check. Cool. This works. Hey, everyone. I am James Bourque, one of the co-founders of Intu. We do account infrastructure, and I am going to echo a lot of the things that you just heard about infrastructure and all of those important things. So today, we are talking about why identity is the most important thing you should own. In my opinion, identity is probably the biggest thing that we haven't figured out yet. And hopefully this will be somewhat practical. This is DevConnect, and we're supposed to be building stuff. So we're going to get there. So starting off with reorientation, right? This is the whole theme for this week, this conference, Dreamworld, etc. Getting back to the why of Web3. And I think we can echo this again, like we've kind of lost sight of why we set out to do this. So a couple important things. I think that especially with identity, this starts with self-sovereignty, which for me really means choice. It means agency. This means that I am creating my own identity. I am not being provided this identity. The second one is censorship resistance. And then the third one is digital ownership, right? This idea that my data is important and please don't copy paste it anymore. What you're not going to see in this presentation is that decentralization is the answer. This is a critical characteristic that helps us get to where we're going. And the reality is that if we keep focusing on decentralization, if that's the only goal, then we're going to miss the mark, right? This is a mile marker on the journey to where we want to go. This shouldn't be the end goal. And this is something that people compromise on all the time. Right? Oh, we're going to build this project. We're going to introduce all of this Web 2 stack. And then once we have users, we promise we're going to decentralize, right? It's like Mark not monetizing your data. Right. There's no real, there's no reason to decentralize later. It's harder, for sure. No shit, right? Like decentralization is hard. But we need to focus on this being a characteristic and not being just the end goal. The last thing on this, the reality is that we keep imitating Web 2 experiences, right? We keep trying to recreate things that already exist. And in doing so, we're not really, when we forget the why of Web 3, we're losing the reason that it should be better, right? If you're losing the agency, if you're losing the self-sovereignty, if you're losing the censorship resistance, you're just imitating the radio, but you don't have broadband internet yet for your Spotify, right? We're not quite there yet. So getting back to like the OG goals of Web3, right? And this is like the first flavor of Kool-Aid that we drank. This is kind of why we set out way back when. This is back when blockchain was still a hype word and we had to start introducing things like cryptocurrency and DLT just to like get away from the mainstream media. Goals included things like financial inclusion. My money is really unstable and mercurial, and I don't like it, so we need an alternative. Things like better organizations of communities. We haven't had such an ambitious DAO project since 2016, right? Most importantly, I think digital ownership through digital unique assets. This was what it was supposed to be before they were JPEGs, right? We were talking about the deed to your house, the title to your car, things that really mattered, data that you did not want to copy and paste. And we've really done very little with this, I think, since we started. And the last one, preservation of human dignity. I know that this, probably kind of a loose, fuzzy one, but I should be able to buy my 3-year-old goddaughter a bathing suit with watermelons on it and not have to worry about being advertised grown-ass women wearing bikinis that are in the shape of fruit, right? Like, the internet shouldn't feel gross, but it kind of does right now, and this all comes back to identity. So, identity is the only way to get there, but if you can't define who you are, then you're letting other people do it for you. And I think the most important thing that I hope you walk away from this little presentation today is that it's all about choice, right? It's all about empowering end users, empowering the next generation of humanity on the internet, our digital lives, to have a choice, right? And it's not just UX, right? That's not enough. It's got to be there's got to be more value added to it. For human rights, like last night we were actually sitting here, we were talking about the right to privacy. The reality is that like the concept of human rights is historically relatively new. And in the past 100 years or something, this is something that we have relied on authorities to provide for us. So it's very easy to be comfortable in Web 2 with organizations providing you with, digital human rights. But the reality is that Web 3 was really a reaction to this. And the idea was that instead of somebody telling me who I can be, I'm going to reach out and I'm going to grab some statistically impossible number, and this will become the foundation of my identity. This will become who I am and how I identify to other things. And so if we lose that part of it, right, if we lose the ability to create my own account, we're really forfeiting what was supposed to be one of the major components of Web 3. So what is an identity? Let's get a working definition going. This is going to be a little bit boring, but it's network addressing, right? We take it for granted that in the internet today, you're assigned an IP address, right? They just give you an identity that you use to identify to the rest of the network. Web 3, the whole point was I can create my own. I don't need to rely on a service or an authority to go ahead and connect and interact with the rest of the network. The second, it should be publicly static, right? I say publicly static because in order to get the longevity bit, we actually have to be able to change our private keys, right? Your bank will ask you to change your password every 6 weeks. Whether you do it, it's up to you. But the longer a secret has been in use, the more likely it's been compromised. So our public-facing side needs to be static, but our private side, our secrets, our passwords, those need to change over time. It should be practical. The credentials should be composable, right? So your identity is static, but the way that you identify yourself to different organizations is composable. When you walk into a bar, I have to show an ID that says I am over 21. I can't leave the country with my driver's license. I need a passport for that, right? That's an additional credential. I can't walk into a bank with a library card and walk out with a mortgage. They're looking for different information. Right now in Web 3, we're doing one size fits all, and that's not going to work, right? You can't have one wallet, one general purpose experience with one credential, which is your private key, to connect to everything else, right? We're talking about, same thing Danny said with the credit card. You don't want to give that when you walk into the store. Same thing here, we need composable credentials. So we're going to get into the practical part. With our devs, we like to use something called Moscow in order to prioritize things. So this is must have, should have, could have, won't have. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a dev, but I find this is a really good way of kind of segmenting into what it is that we're actually talking about. So let's start with the must-haves. Things that we cannot compromise on. First one is individuals actually creating accounts. This is the computational equivalent of I think, therefore I am, right? I created my own identity. No one can take it from me. This is the difference between please come and take it versus please don't take it away. The second is choice in custody, but mostly self-custody. And I say choice in custody because the reality is we have different comfort levels depending on what we are storing, right? I am comfortable having $10,000 at home, but anything more than that, I'll probably want to put it in a bank, right? And the bank is only comfortable really storing up to like 150, 250K. At that point, even the bank is like, guys, we need the government. I want someone else to step in and cover my ass if something goes wrong. So the reality is when it comes to your identity, when it comes to accounts in Web3, we should be able to customize that based on what the requirements are. Availability, it shouldn't go through a service, right? You should be able to connect to this independently. Yes, you can use other services like Infura, but you should always be able to do it on your own, right? It's this ability to run back home and do this independently, self-sovereign. Resiliency, no single point of failure. That means APIs are kind of anti-Web3. RPC points are a challenge. It's a reality, but again, you can always run home. Longevity, security. You should be able to use this for a decade. If you're investing in an identity on Web3, but it's only good for 2 years because you cannot change your private key, this will not work. And last is compatibility. No more walled gardens. Should-haves. Convenience with an acceptable compromise, right? This is all now about distributing risk. So when I'm saying convenience, think like your Face ID. I am totally okay with the idea of people using a Face ID to create a Web3 account. I'm not okay with Face ID being the only way to identify yourself on Web3, right? You don't want to give that back to, your identity back to an authority. You don't want it to go back to Google, to Apple, to Facebook, etc. Composability would be fantastic. Privacy when appropriate, not just for criminals, right? We all want to be able to shop in private, be anonymous. That is something that we desire as a right. The ability to choose for other people to subsidize your payments. Paymaster is a fantastic concept, but it cannot be required, right? Distributing risk, including trusted third parties. This is, again, like your bank. And then realistically, it should be ultra low bandwidth. You should be able to do this on your phone. It should work in a developing country, right? You shouldn't have to have a cutting edge, leading edge 5G network plus the latest iPhone, latest Android, whatever, in order to identify yourself to this network. And then the could-haves. Reputation be fantastic, right? It would be awesome if I could have that tied directly in at an infrastructure level, not as a service. It should be backwards compatible. It would be super nice, right? I can log into my Google Docs or some future version of it without requiring, to actually go through that authority. Subsidizing payments anonymized, again, could have, and then super convenient use with consent. So always giving people the choice to be more convenient, but with the option. And then if you no longer agree with the way that ecosystem is working, then you always have the right to leave, right? That's kind of what we keep coming back to. And last but not least, the won't-haves. 3 can keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. So number 1, issued identities, aka trust. Like we cannot forfeit this ability to create our own accounts, right? That means no services. That means no relying on other people. We have to keep the ability to create our own accounts. Secondly, and this might be a little controversial, subscriptions. I am tired of seeing subscriptions in Web3. It is fundamentally in conflict with our ethos. Subscriptions work because you can be turned off if you do not pay, right? I no longer pay for Netflix. I no longer enjoy the TV shows that I want to see. If Web3 is truly self-sovereign, if it is truly independent, that means it cannot be turned off. That means the subscription does not work. The reality is that we've spent all of this time and effort inventing programmable internet money, but we're not using it to capture value in our projects. Subscriptions will not work in Web3. High cost maintenance overhead, incentivizing an entire network to perform one task is ambitious, right? We should be building infrastructure that is commoditized, that is public. We should be leveraging the fact that we're sharing all of these different resources as a community. Walled gardens, the ability to leave, right? You do not create an identity and then just stay in one place. You should be able to take that with you. I created this identity for a game. I no longer want to play this game, but that doesn't mean I need to create a new one somewhere else, right? I can take that with me. And then the last but not least, involuntary transparency, right? Having people force you to take information that you otherwise would not want to lose. So back to the original goals. If we're talking about financial inclusion, right, identity is incredibly important because a lot of times the people that we're trying to include don't have access to a credit card. They cannot use a fiat on or off ramp. They don't have a bank account. If they can't create their own account and they can't earn their own crypto, we will never actually include people that are outside of the banking system, right? They need to be able to own their identity. Better organization of communities. This is now getting into recognition, right? So we have self-sovereign identity. I created this and I own this, but it also needs to work in a way that other organizations and institutions can then verify and accept my identity, right? There's 2 parts to this. And so we will never get DAOs replacing governments or larger organizations if we don't have a better sense of identity. Digital ownership through digital unique assets. It's supposed to be forever. You need to be able to have your identity forever. And last but not least, the human dignity in the digital world, right? We need to be able to choose. It's about agency, again. Wrapping up here, I know this might not seem super practical, but I promise it is. It starts here. It starts in this room. It starts with community. We've got to stop compromising on things that are actually important, right? We need to preserve the why Web3 is better. I hate talking to Web2 people and them saying, but why Web3? Google works just fine, right? There was this moment in 1995 with Bill Gates and Letterman where he was explaining streaming audio in 1995. And Letterman's response was, have you heard of the radio? Have you heard of the tape recorder? We were imitating an experience whose UX was perfectly fine for the time, and it'd be a decade until we'd get the value add of streaming audio, right? We had to preserve the why of the technology that was underpinning the service. Always keep in mind that open and universal often wins, right? This is why we have the World Wide Web and not the information superhighway. And also, it's not just one thing. We need to distribute our identities across multiple things. So it's not a smart contract wallet. It's not just network-enabled custody. It's not centralized exchanges. It's a combination of all of these things, right? We need variety in how we go ahead and identify ourselves. Final thoughts. Our infrastructure still feels like dial-up, just without the noise. We are competing with Web 2, which has had decades to introduce the infrastructure that they have and provide the experiences that they do. So take a longer look at it. We need to keep working on better infrastructure. A lot of times people ask, have we optimized our infrastructure yet? The answer is no. We haven't figured out so much, right? You can't connect securely to Web3 without using a TLS connection, without using a DNS resolver. There is so much infrastructure left to build. Right now, this feels a little bit like America Online, CompuServe, like we're like 1995, 1996. We need to get people online first, and then we can go ahead and focus on the applications. And we need to stop decentralizing later, right? Oh, and the last thing, it's not just for humans, right? We have AI, we have IoT, we have non-Web3 networks that also need to interact with Web3 that would benefit from interacting with Web3, and identity comes back to that as well. So, in short, the most valuable thing you should own is your identity, and this is really just the choice on how you identify yourself to different networks, different services, different communities, whether it's the digital world, again, preserving choice. So thank you very much, everyone. I am James Bourque with Intu. Appreciate your time.